Also, what used to be an office is now generating up to $500 or $600 every weekend, and there are no restrictions on how we can use that money. So once we got to where we were no longer seen or perceived as focusing on the pre-K age group, because this program was no longer going on, and we had the science, we were now, had money for science and needed to go out and do science programming, so we kind of switched our gears. But it's taken several years for people to realize that, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders can now come to the museum, and there'll be a science program, some kind of educational value that goes along with their curriculum. As this has naturally occurred, I was just looking over our numbers. In the 2008 year, I had 9 requests for science programs outside of the ones that we had already scheduled. This year, 2009, February, March, and April, I have 16 requests for science programs outside the ones that we've already scheduled. So in a way, when you're looking at adapting, thriving, meeting the needs of your community, sometimes what might look like a disaster, you can actually turn around and make something positive out of it. That just because things don't go the way you wanted them to doesn't mean that you have to stop and fail. And it's being in Fayetteville, I will say, Children's Museum could not have a better home than being 10 miles from Fort Bragg. We have thousands of babies born in Cumberland County every year, and so our audience never grows stale. And in fact, we have the last 4 years we have continued to see a rise in our admissions, in our birthday parties, rentals, memberships. I think we're about 67% increase in admissions in the last 4 years. So that's where we are now putting, our focus and our energy, because that's where our discretionary income is coming from.
One thing I hope you've realized as we've told our personal stories, and as I will tell mine, is that we've tried to mix this up a little bit. Lisa and Susan both run museums whose budget is about $500,000 a year, and Van's and Edventure is around $4 million a year. So we're sort of at the two ends of the spectrum, so to speak, in terms of the size of institution. We're also a mixture of collections-based museums and non-collections-based. And so as you hear us tell our stories, keep in mind that we represent different niches, and that there's small and large in the non-collections as well as small and large in the collections-based institutions. I'm going to try to bring it a little nearer to term and focus mostly on the last year. But for those of you who don't know Edventure, we are a very large children's museum. We're actually the 15th largest children's museum in the country. We are very giant-sized for a community of 700,000 in terms of our metropolitan population of Columbia, and we opened in the fall of 2003. In that almost 5.5 years, our budget has more than doubled from about $2 million a year to now approximately $4 million a year, and we have not grown it simply from admissions. Our budget now is a 50-50 between earned revenue as well as contributed and government support. And so we have grown it primarily in the areas of the budget that are non-admissions related. And in this economy, it's very healthy to have a well-diversified budget. I want to fast forward a minute to a year ago. A year ago, we were doing two things. One, we were in the early phases of planning the implementation of a next generation of permanent exhibits. When you have a building of about 70,000 square feet with a proposed expansion of an additional 10,000, which should start sometime this summer, we are constantly in a growth and a reinvention mode. And as we do that, we're working, several years in advance. And what we intended to do, and still intend to do, is to implement a revision as well as new major exhibitions in a lot of areas of the building, focusing more in some content areas where we were where we intend to go. But at the same time, we were looking at what was beginning to happen to the economy and listening to very smart people who happen to sit on our board or that we work with in the community who were in the financial services industry, and they were all saying, you know, we've got to really watch where we're going. And as early as about 10 months ago, we began to hold positions open. So we began to reinvent how our staff was functioning in an environment and actually ask staff to take on additional responsibilities so that we could keep some positions open. That continued through the fall, as well as we made one round of budget cuts, which were not especially painful. All budget cuts are painful, let's face it, no matter what size your budget is. But we were doing things like reserving some of our advertising dollars, which we spend approximately $1 per visitor, and we have a little bit more than 200,000 visitors a year, but we spend about $1 a visitor on advertising and marketing outside in our local market as well as regionally. So we began to conserve those resources. By the late fall, however, we had decided we were doing two things. One, we were bidding the first phase of this next generation exhibit plan, which is, I'm very pleased to say, is under construction right now and will open the second weekend in May. But we were also beginning to look at round 2 of budget cuts. Now, round 2, we began to cut into the muscle of the museum a little bit. And in fact, in early January, we did a reduction in force in our staff, and we eliminated 3 positions. And that one of those positions was particularly painful for me because it was my director of development. And while I have other development staff members, it meant that yours truly became the chief development officer in addition to being the CEO. And so it has been and continues to be a very painful process, but we are determined to continue to achieve our goals in terms of building cash reserves, in terms of building fund balances, and achieving our mission and our vision for this institution. And so it's been a combination of making strategic decisions that help us both in the short term as well as the long term. And now I'm going to show you, and actually I think, Chris, I'll come over there and control it. I will show you one of the techniques that we've used over the last 5 years that I think has been very helpful for us.
Okay. Is it just...
We like to think of this as it's a new tool for your toolbox. I don't know how many of you have sacred cows in your organization. Do any of you have sacred cows? I see some smiles. I bet we could all think of one or two. And it's so interesting. I'm a little bit like Lisa. I happen to be very fortunate to lead a new institution. So, you know, all the sacred cows, I guess we could say I'm the mother of any sacred cows, or some of my staff members are mothers or fathers of sacred cows. But we work really hard to allow them to be sacred cows with a small s and a small c, because we believe that it is possible to have both mission and margin. And this is why I told you a little bit earlier about how our budget is 50-50 between revenues and support, because we believe that is a healthy balance. It is important, we think, to not let go of the mission, but also to train, particularly your education staff, that margins are really important.